will power Europe's next fintech boom. If I could welcome on stage three fantastic panelists to help us dissect this subject. We have Keith Gross, Head of UK at Plaid. Hello, Keith. How's it all going?
Good, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Excellent stuff. Also joining us is Carlos Lopez Moctezuma, Global Head of New Business, Models, Open Banking and Innovation at BBVA. Hi, Carlos.
Thank you. Hi, how are you? Thanks for the invitation.
Great stuff. And I guess as it's our Europe Day, we should be saying sort of where are you dialing in from?
Yeah, sure. I'm calling from Spain.
Excellent. And Keith, you're in London, I think.
I'm in East London. Yes.
East London. Yeah, great place. Good stuff. Lastly, joining us, Benedict Voller, VP Business Clients and Partnerships at Raisin. Hi, Benedict. And Benedict, where are you dialing in from today?
Yeah, from Berlin.
From Berlin. Great, fantastic. So APIs, the future of banking. I think that's what we're discussing. Yeah, Keith, perhaps do you want to give us a flavor of Plaid? You know, obviously you're fully into this space. What do you think?
Yeah, I think for those that aren't aware of Plaid or Plaid, we'll respond to either. We are a platform of open banking APIs. So we're infrastructure on top of which other fintechs can build all sorts of fantastic use cases around financial data and payments. And we span North America, the UK, and Europe at this point. And I think we're really seeing the beginning of a realization of the value of B2B infrastructure in terms of helping fintechs grow and expand. That's something that Plaid is powerful and a big part of. But I think that's a movement that's coming to the forefront now. And I think all of our panelists are big pieces of that.
Excellent. Carlos, you're representing, I guess, you know, the incumbent very much in this panel, but BBVA is obviously very, very digital first, very, very engaged into the fintech world, you know, in Europe. Could you maybe just give us a bit of an overview of how you guys see APIs fitting into your long-term strategy?
Sure. I think for us, our strategy for open banking is extremely important for the future of the bank. I think, of course, there are different types of business models that you could build using APIs, and one of those is allowing third parties to build their own business models with your APIs. That's part of it, and we are doing so in some markets. But I think our main focus now is for building partnerships with other with third-party ecosystems. I think the only way that banks will be able to really grow in the future and to take advantage of third-parry digital ecosystems is through offering financial services through them. Then for doing that, it wouldn't be impossible if you don't have a good open banking strategy and the right APIs for doing so. Then it's very important for BBVA.
Really, really interesting. So do you think we're starting to see that, you know, translate into maybe not the bottom line of incumbent banks, but certainly in growth, in keeping up with the growing trends? Are we starting to see that as a tangible thing?
Sure. In terms of acquisition and cross-selling, it will be extremely important in the following couple of years. All the business that you can get, that you can bring to the bank, coming from that new channel that is the open banking channel for acquisition, it will be especially important in the future.
Okay, very interesting. Benedict, let's just focus a little bit on Raisin. Maybe you could give us a sort of an overview, because I think you well, you're obviously a fintech, but you've also bought a bank, and also you've been very, very active. Probably one of the most active companies in partnerships. So maybe you could just give us a bit of a flavor of how APIs have fitted into that strategy, and what you're sort of doing going forward to capture some of those trends that Carlos was talking about.
Sure. So Raisin itself, it's a platform for saving and investment products. We are active throughout continental Europe, in the UK, also with a separate entity, and also started our business in the US, where it's a little bit different approach than we have in Europe. And we have our whole business model based on connecting banks and deposit-taking banks, especially with the end consumer. And so connecting as a fintech with banks is like kind of our DNA. And then we also started a business of connecting to the other side. So as a B2B2C kind of provider, bringing our products closer to the customer through white label solutions or similar. And we even have been one of the very first partners of BBVA Connect, which was like a project, early project of BBVA to like bring out some of their data and the, let's say, richness that sits in the data and make use of it through API connections and making customer experience easier. What we have seen, though, on the other side is also that there is a lot of, it's not all APIs if you want to connect. So there are lower tech kind of solutions, and it has been paramount to be able to support all kind of different solutions from manual to automated and file exchange to API. And so I think the broader context, interconnectedness is super important, but it's not all API, but it's going more and more into API, and does so as well as we have seen the internal systems being built more API-based, more microservice-based. So we see a lot of big banks, incumbents, but also the new startups, fintechs and neobanks to build their IT infrastructure on basically APIs, and they don't have to be necessarily external, but it obviously makes things easier to turn to the outside world with those APIs or with that knowledge of how to build an API, and then you can decide do you want to partner or not. But technology-wise, that is really the direction everything is going in.
And I guess what this trend does run on is the quality of those APIs and the reliability and that sort of thing. Has that materially changed in the last year or two? And what's it sort of, have you noticed that at Raisin?
I would say that like building a good API documentation, following standards, it's just like knowledge that is building up and improving. So that's for sure. I think the standards like REST API, JSON format, and so on have been around for a very long time and are the ones that are being used all over. So I think it's more about seeing the competency being built in the teams and more people dedicated to APIs that then, as a consequence, improves quality and creates experience in all kind of partners, institutes, fintechs, banks, etc.
Interesting. Keith, I'd just love to hear a bit about your experiences, obviously in this sort of year, in this period, these last 8 or 9 months, and what that has meant for this sort of API economy in finance. Obviously, that's something you guys are very squarely in, and building the business over here. What are you what have you been seeing? Have you been seeing an acceleration of the trend?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's already a trend towards APIs improving over time. I think it varies drastically by market, where regulators are enforcing the quality of open banking APIs, the differences in the specs themselves. But then that was all accelerated by COVID, right? Because you had whole swaths of people that were not familiar with fintech or mobile banking or online banking, suddenly forced to manage their entire financial lives in online banking. So some great stats. In March and April, the fastest growing segment of users for PayPal was people over 50 years old. Whole generations that hadn't used fintech are joining it for the first time. And we really saw that in terms of the traffic and usage of our platform as well, because you just have people who needed tools and access. And I think what's coming out of that is you're seeing almost 5 years of acceleration in the past year because of COVID. And I think there will be some return to people doing physical and traditional banking afterwards. But I do think the watermark is going to be set higher post-COVID when we return to normal. And I think the usage and frequent usage of fintech is making consumers and small businesses more comfortable with the value they're getting from this. And so I do think we're starting to see COVID accelerating the fintech ecosystem and the growth of API-based infrastructure behind that as a result as well.
Really interesting. And what would you say, particular product areas where we can see some of this, category areas where we can see some of this happening, maybe next year, 2022. Yesterday there was a huge focus on lending at the event, and there was a particular panel that focused on open banking in lending. Now, nearly every panel seemed to mention in some way open banking sort of powering lending. But would you agree with that as an interesting area of growth for the likes of you guys? But also, what other sort of product areas, category areas do you think we'll see?
I think absolutely lending has been one of the big ones. When you think about it right now, particularly for small businesses, access to capital is the most important thing. And the health of a small business has changed so much over the past 6 months that traditional ways of measuring lending, where you bring in a bunch of bank statements and you have a credit score, those just get outdated so fast. And so the use of open banking and lending has added really real value. And then the use of open banking payments to actually distribute funds, be it in lending, so distributing cycles or PPP funds in the UK, in the US, or just handling your payments and transfers via open banking, I think is the next step. That's something that Plaid is really excited about here in the UK and Europe to help power. And I do think the growth of payments as the PIS side of open banking is going to be a use case that we see grow more and more in the coming year. And I think right before this, you heard further confirmation of that from other players in the space. And I do think that's the next big growth area as well in open banking.
Carlos, what are your thoughts on Keith's prophecy? Do you agree?
Sure, I totally agree that lending APIs will play a very important role in the future development of open banking. We are seeing it both in the SME side, but also in the retail side, with e-commerce financing playing also a very important role of in terms of APIs. Actually, we are working in some business models with different partners for that. And why is that? Because now we are moving from the mandatory APIs world of open banking regulation to the construction of other business models. And if you think in mandatory APIs and depending the country, but accounts play an important role there. Now, I think we are not going to make a lot of money coming from accounts per se, more thinking in the levels of interest rates in Europe, especially. But if we think in the other hand about lending and the profitability that you can get enabling business models for lending, it will be a completely different story. Then yes, I consider lending will play an important role.
And is that something that's happening at the moment inside BBVA, or is it something you're working on?
Yeah, it's something that we already have built a couple of APIs for consumer finance in different countries, not only in Europe, and a lot of them in Latin. And there we have not launched them yet because we are working with our partners in doing some tests, but that will be very soon in production.
Benedict, what are your thoughts on some of the growth areas? Obviously, Raisin is very active in the in the savings space, but what are your thoughts about some of the growth areas that we might see in the next year or two?
Yeah, so I think that the whole COVID situation, depending on the market, but has definitely accelerated the investment product part of it. So people are more considerate of market products, and I mean there has been this whole boom of trading trading apps this year, and not only the new ones, but also I think all the existing players have seen a huge uptick there. So that is something that's definitely going to grow. And question is like for the players in the market that currently do own the customer connection, like are you building things yourself? Are you partnering with someone else who provides the technology? And as we have also seen with open banking, like it's not everybody can build everything themselves, and that is also true for API connections. So I mean, I think that's more or less where we see the business model of that, anyways. But it's like, there's a mandatory rules for banks to have PSD2 interfaces, but like how do they look like? I mean, they're not all based on the same standard. So the complexity of connecting to a lot of players is high, as well as it is as other technology is in terms of like those trading platforms, for example. So I think we see a continuous boom of in the background B2B white label providers that fuel best of class technology to the end consumer without them knowing, fronted by incumbents, by fintechs, etc. And a lot of this will be API powered.
Very interesting. I just want to talk a little bit about business models. We've seen, I guess, in the UK, pretty good uptake in open banking so far. It certainly seems to be accelerating after a slow start. Now, how to monetize it, that still seems to be quite a question. And interestingly, Monzo included open banking in their premium paid for monthly account service, which clearly shows that's one potential model. Keith, what do you think are some of the emerging business models to monetize this boom?
I think like anything else, the key to this is you can only monetize something when you're adding real value. So what are the use cases behind open banking that are adding real value to SMEs and consumers? Lending is a great example. I think the Monzo example that you mentioned, where you're building account aggregation into a banking application, I think that's almost becoming table stakes at this point for most banks and large fintech applications to have somewhere where you can manage and see your whole financial health. And so I think at some point that is going to be something that every institution needs to build and have offered to users. But I think then this takes you towards open finance. A monetization path there could be, can you add access to investment data or utility data or mortgage rates or things that aren't covered by open banking that adds real value to a user and monetize that? I think for Plaid, where we sit in the ecosystem, we do a usage-based business model, which aligns incentives very well. We only make money if users are actually using this, and you're as a fintech app seeing value from this. It aligns incentives really well. But I think depending on where you are in the stack, there's lots of different ways to monetize this. I think the key thing to realize is that your current account for a consumer and for an SME is rapidly becoming a routing hub versus the center of your financial life. And so you need to think of it in that way and build usage and business models around that.
Interesting. And you know what you're sort of I guess referring to are some of the sort of the newer buzzwords, I guess, around this API boom. Open finance in the UK, you know, has very much crystallized this year. The broadening out to wider financial services and non-financial services. Carlos, is the same thing happening across Europe? Are we seeing a sort of open finance movement emerging?
Yeah, I think yes. Of course, the UK started first, and I think what is happening in the UK is a good estimate that the things that we can expect in the rest of Europe, because also after PSD2 we will start seeing more and more similar things than the things that we are looking in the UK. Of course, in terms of you mentioned in terms of profitability and how to monetize the platforms, I think thinking in banks, in incumbents, in traditional banks, I think many banks have started building these platforms for exposing APIs to third parties, given the regulation, the mandatory part of it. And then they are starting to build APIs just because they want to build APIs, but without any real business model behind. And many banks have found extremely difficult to monetize those platforms because with PSD2 or with other banking, you cannot, with the regulatory APIs, you cannot monetize the platform. Then what to do next? What are the business models that you need to build for that? And I don't know the rest of the banks, but at least we are taking an approach of really building partnerships with big ecosystems thanks to our platforms. And I can mention two examples. One is the partnership that we built in Mexico with Uber for launching a branded account, totally API-fied and living in the Uber ecosystem. Where there we will be able to monetize that. Also in the US, now we are working with Google for launching accounts and other products through Google Pay and opening accounts there. We think that we also will be able to monetize that part. And we are working with other e-commerce platforms and other third-party ecosystems where we think there's profitability for the bank in the future. Then I hope with that I am answering your question.
Very much, and I'm very sorry to say, but we are out of time. It is a really fascinating conversation, definitely one that I could continue a bit longer. So yeah, very huge thanks to Keith, Benedict, Carlos. Thank you very much. Hope to continue the conversation soon.
Thank you, pleasure.
Thank you. So we will just be going to a 2-minute break. Up next, we have one of our first deep dives into exploring the ecosystem of key fintech centers around Europe. And this next one will be Berlin. Thank you.